it.
Michelle Donald.
Thank you. This clause, by extending the provision to vulnerable and not just priority need, goes to the very heart of the bill, which is about expanding what we do for everybody that needs the help on offer. These are very important checks that we're talking about. Things like gas safety, electricity records, these are essential to people's not only well-being but actual lives. And the group of people, the vulnerable, are not necessarily those that would be able to make sure these checks had been done beforehand. A lot of people who rent from the private sector, of course, are very aware of the checks that they need and quite capable and able of getting those checks all the way through. And a lot of those that are vulnerable will be able to as well, but there are a group of people that cannot, and it's important that we look after their well-being and ensure that they are in safe accommodation. A number of members have spoken about rogue landlords and the work that's already been done and the work that still needs to be done, and this clause must be seen in conjunction with tackling rogue landlords and not in isolation, because alone this is not sufficient. It is important to note that not all landlords are rogue landlords at all, and they are providing a great deal of service by providing these housing, but we must look after those that are affected by housing that is not up to standard. Another point I want to note is that a lot of councils throughout the country will already be doing these checks. I know that Wiltshire Council, that are the council in my constituency, already do provide checks for a number of people that are vulnerable. However, the standard that we need across the country needs to be one standard, and we need to ensure that no matter where you live or wherever you are homeless, you need to have the same provision of care given to you. And that is very much what this bill seeks to initiate. I want to touch on a point that was referenced by one of the opposite members in the last session, which was to do with the fact that although this expands it to vulnerable people, not everybody that is in need will actually fit into that category. For instance, pregnant women, and there's a whole host of other different types of anomalies that will slip through that gap that actually, if you sat back, you would think they are very much in need of these extra checks on private accommodation. So I would urge the Minister to think about expanding this clause. I know that if I had the thought of constituents in my own constituency of Chippenham, pregnant women, etc., that were what I would deem vulnerable, unable to get these additional checks, it would be harrowing for them, and also to detriment of all of us that are working on this bill. We need to make sure that it is inclusive and encompasses help for all.
Of course, yeah.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Does he also accept that failing to act early not only hinders our ability to combat homelessness, but it also enables complex needs and problems to escalate over time? And a lot of my local charities have echoed that message to me, that the quicker we act and the earlier we get in, then the less these needs escalate and develop, which will save us money on our NHS, our local authorities and other sectors in the long run.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, because she's quite right when she suggests that prevention is always better than cure. But it's also about rewarding the right kind of behaviour, and we want to encourage people to come to us at the earliest possible opportunity, the point at which they're not in crisis but they can foresee themselves at risk of homelessness, so we can take the most appropriate action. Because what she's quite right in saying, my honourable friend, is that at that early opportunity you have options. When someone reaches crisis, you have very few options, and the options that you do have are expensive options.
Thank you for giving way. Will you also acknowledge the fact that in Wales this is already happening, because they opened up the period which we classify as threatened by homelessness, and that's actually, it backs up this clause in fact and proves that it does work to prevent homelessness.
I think my honourable friend makes a very good point. What I would say to her though is, and it's probably been said outside of this committee many times before in the discussions that I've had, particularly around the amendments that we're looking to make to clause 7, for example, that the housing market in England and in particular in London is very, very different from the one in Wales. And I think we can certainly draw many parallels from the Welsh legislation and have confidence that in many ways it will have a very, very positive effect.
I thank the member for giving way. Does he also acknowledge the fact that it simplifies it, because the initial feedback was that it was far too complicated, and we're now working towards a more simplified bill that will actually be easier to roll out?
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. And simplifying bills is always good news. One of the things that we originally set out to do was to provide detail where it's required, but simplify processes wherever possible. But I do think it's fair to say, and I would ask the Minister when he sums up on his amendments, to make clear that we will obviously look at the operation of this in practice, and so that if local authorities are in some way, shape or form not following both the letter of the law but also the spirit of the law, that in any code of practice that we would introduce, we would ensure that appropriate measures would be introduced to actually enforce that as a way of ensuring that local authorities do honour the concerns that I think are rightly raised right around this committee on this particular section.
Whilst we're still discussing this clause, I wanted to stress the fact that it is not only large charities and large organisations that have been welcoming and calling, in fact, for the extension to 56 days. Charities in my own constituency and organisations like Doorway, which do a great deal of work on homelessness in Chippenham and my constituency, are delighted by the extension of this and have stressed how important and vital it is to deal with homelessness at the root and to try and prevent homelessness in the future.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. And quite clearly, I would recognise that up and down the country there are local charities that are doing brilliant work to combat homelessness. And obviously, during my discussions on the bill, I've dealt with national charities in the main and some local charities where I've visited. But clearly, every member will be well aware of the various different local charities that do excellent work, which is why I think this is universally welcomed.